Hello, welcome back to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, joined by George Elek, and we have another new signing this week. It's Sam Tighe. You may have seen Sam doing a few little explainer videos for Who Scored at the start of the season, but Sam, we're delighted to have you on board. How are you doing?
Very well, mate. Thank you. Yeah, you wouldn't see me because I was the voice behind it. There was no visuals, but you may have heard me. So this may be ringing a few bells. Either way, good to put a face to the name for a lot of people. But it's a pleasure to be here, guys. Pleasure to record with you both.
We'll have less of correcting the presenter on your first. George, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I feel a bit like, my honeymoon period of being the new guy on the podcast.
That's long.
No, it's 1 week. And I'm already the veteran. So, welcome to Sam. Sam and I shared a pint before Aston Villa's playoff final victory a few years ago. So met a couple of times, but never done any work together before. So this is very exciting.
I'm suddenly having flashbacks that I think I actually met you that day after the game.
Yeah,
I definitely saw Sam.
How do you not remember, Dan?
I remember saying Sam, but it was obviously you that was with him, but I didn't know you at the time.
I
didn't really. You weren't Villa. I didn't really care about you. I didn't really care.
He was also with his. I can't remember if it was girlfriend, fiance, or wife at the time. So I hope you're not mistaking me for her.
I could. I'd had a few to drink that day. In fairness, I may not be remembering everything completely clearly. Just a quick recap on last week, or not really a recap, but ask you lads what you thought of the first weekend of the Premier League season. I mean, I watched 5 games in the end, George, but it was an interesting start to the season as always.
Yeah, it was fascinating to see how certain teams under certain managers were set up. I think in particular, certainly seeing how Ange Postecoglou was going to play out was interesting. I think seeing Bournemouth under the new manager, given the style of play that we were expecting to see, was fun. On a personal level, I was on a stag do with a massive Villa fan in Edinburgh. So we watched the first half of Villa Newcastle in a pub in Edinburgh, and the barman had to basically tell the stag, our mate, that if he didn't stop swearing at the TV, he was going to have to leave, which is quite an impressive feat given it was during the Fringe Festival. So that was kind of the enjoyable part of it. But I've caught up with it all, and it was, we'll get into it all in a bit. There was certainly some pretty promising signs, I think, from some new regimes and some new teams.
Yeah, I'm putting you on the spot here, Sam, on your first podcast. Obviously, as the voice of tactics, not the face, as we discovered earlier. Was there anything tactical that you noticed in the first week? As expected, quite a lot of teams went to inverted fullbacks, like seeing Luke Shaw do that. We didn't see him do that last season. Not sure it worked, but
Yeah, I'm not sure it worked. So George was in Scotland. I was in Canada. Okay. So I have also spent the week catching up. I managed to make it back in time for the Monday night game to watch Manchester United get extremely lucky, which we'll get into. But I spent Saturday and Sunday in Montreal, and it's very difficult to watch Premier League football in Montreal, guys.
Really?
It's not. I would say not impossible. But because of the fact that it's on a pay-per-view service in Canada, most of the bars that are open at the time that Premier League football was played there, so 9 a.m., 11 a.m., 12 a.m., they can't show the channel. They can't have a pay-per-view channel if they also don't allow minors in. There's some very strange and specific rules. I walked around Montreal for like an hour to try and find Villa Newcastle, missed the entire first half, just caught the second. Probably not worth watching.
No.
But then I managed to find a place for the next day, so I was able to settle in and watch Chelsea against Liverpool. And I've written a piece for the Who Scored website this week talking about the kind of unleashed Enzo Fernandez, maybe more akin to what we saw at the World Cup for Argentina, and the impact that Moises Caicedo is going to have next to him as well, and what that's going to mean for Chelsea. Another topic that I guess we're going to get into over the course of the podcast here.
Yeah, we will. I mean, that was my favourite game of the weekend, Chelsea-Liverpool. I thought that game was absolutely fascinating. Yeah. But we're going to start with Tottenham against Manchester United. And Sam, it was the first glimpse we got of Tottenham post-Harry Kane. First time under Postecoglou as well. What did you make of Spurs?
Yeah, exciting and fun, but predictably very counter-attackable. Now, this might have been a bit of a perfect storm because Brentford are one of the best counter-attacking units in the league. There's a still somewhat confusing narrative that flies around that I hear sometimes that Brentford are a really good possession team. Since they've come into the Premier League, that hasn't necessarily been the case. I'm not saying they can't do it, but whenever you play Brentford, you know that you're going to have to play against a very well organised deep block or maybe a mid block, but a very, very good tight-knit unit. that removes all the space between the lines, that dominates the box and counter-attacks like crazy. And like, okay, they haven't got Ivan Toney anymore, but Mbeumo is such a threat running into space. And now they have Kevin Schade, who is just like, he's ridiculously fast. This felt like a bit of a perfect storm because we knew that the first months under Ange would be maybe a little bit fragile for Tottenham. Maybe a lot of goals scored, but a fair few conceded too. I did as much research as I could here on the Celtic tenure, and that was certainly the case early doors as things started to settle. And I think we saw that here. I think this was a seriously difficult first game for Tottenham.
Yeah.
And I actually expected them to lose based on the timing of it and the venue and the fact that the two tactical styles don't really work in Tottenham's favour this early on. So for them to come out of it with a point, I was genuinely very pleased for them. And I think they should be delighted because they'll only get better from here. And they've managed to come through this really awkwardly timed test with a point.
Yeah, I think it was a good point. I'm in the same camp as you. And post Harry Kane, as we said, George, good to have defenders chipping in with goals, especially that well-known inverted fullback Emerson Royale popping one in from 30 yards.
Yeah, I guess it was good. I mean, I don't know how sustainable it is to rely on that, albeit, it was an expert delivery from James Maddison for the first goal, which we probably can't expect a fair bit of, although given that Romero had to go off for concussion immediately after that, and it was a header that seemed to absolutely rattle his whole frame. I don't know how ideal that was, but yeah, I mean, I thought Maddison was really impressive. I thought it was interesting how deep he played. It kind of on paper looked like more of a 4-2-3-1, but actually in practice, I think Maddison played almost alongside Basuma and Skip. I thought Basuma was brilliant. Really, really impressive. It looked like the player that basically Spurs thought they were signing a fair while ago. I think they probably do need reinforcements in midfield, with Højbjerg still obviously expected to leave and go to Atleti, with Ndombele, who briefly looked like he was going to re-enter the fray at Spurs, and now seemingly can a Leopard change their spots? Seemingly not, and Ange maybe looking elsewhere. So I thought there were positives, I guess, in terms of it being the first Spurs game post the Kane era. A Richarlison goal, or even just Richarlison looking a little bit more dangerous would have been ideal. But I agree with Sam in that this was almost the worst possible first game in terms of style, but also in terms of expectation, where Spurs fans are always going to believe, regardless of anything, that they should go to Brentford and win, when in actual fact it's a very difficult place to go, and it doesn't suit the style of play that Postecoglou is trying to implement at Tottenham. So in that regard, I think after what was an incredibly entertaining first half and a decent game as well, what we've said before about Spurs being a team for the neutral under Ange, I think we've seen the first glimpse of that. But yeah, relying on a set piece goal and then a kind of pile drive into the bottom corner from Royale probably isn't what we're going to see consistently from the Spurs side.
Don't rule it out. You just never know, George. You never know. In football, although I'm inclined to agree with you, I would say it's probably completely unlikely. Obviously, Maddison and Mount Sam made their debuts last weekend for Tottenham and Manchester United, respectively, and they're the two teams that are lining up against each other this weekend. We've got a Who Scored graphic here. Maddison's stats from the game make quite pleasant reading for Spurs fans, I'd say. Unfair to throw Mason Mount under the bus because it was not a good performance and that midfield was extremely open. But in 68 minutes, he's got 0 key passes, 0 tackles, only 21 passes with an 81% pass accuracy. His Who Scored rating from the game on Monday night against Wolves was 6.25, whereas Maddison's overall was 7.84. Is there anything we can read into that, or do you think that's just a one-off? Manchester United were very open.
Yeah, I mean, I think the performance of the two playmakers here fall in line with the overall level of the team performance, as you've kind of hinted there. I mean, at this stage, we probably can't go any further than that with the analysis. I mean, Spurs look pretty slick in the final third, and Maddison was a big part of that. Starting deep, moving forward, and then sort of shifting left or shifting to the right. To the corner of it, each corner of the penalty box, and making an impact. Whereas Mount was sort of toiling away with everybody else, wasn't he? And this was a genuinely quite dreadful Man United performance, I thought. I was really shocked. And like I said, I'd come back from Montreal that morning and I was pretty tired. And I kept rubbing my eyes because I thought, I must be dreaming or I must be dozing or something, because this does not look like the Manchester United I thought we'd get at the beginning of year 2 Erik ten Hag. He's had now a full year with them. He's had a summer where he's managed to go out and upgrade the team with Mount and Onana, and with 12 months worth of coaching, how is it possible that this is what I'm watching? I was pretty dumbstruck by it all. So I'm going to give Mason Mount a pass because he comes into the season off the back of obviously a pretty a pretty nothing 6 months at Chelsea, where the contractual dispute and injuries ruined everything. He's got no momentum whatsoever. And Man United as a whole, as a collective, were really, really poor. So I'll just give him a pass and say, let's hope it improves. But it won't improve unless the structure of the team improves. So it's not for Mount to fix this. It's for Erik ten Hag to bring this together.
He looked very strange, George. We've already touched on Luke Shaw dropping into the midfield alongside Casemiro. Sorry, and to be honest, it didn't work. But it did just feel like it was Casemiro against Wolves at times, because there's 5 players ahead of him who Wolves just seemed to absolutely breeze past.
Yeah, it seemed pretty obvious to me quite early on in the game that the way that United set out here didn't really... I mean, normally you'd think that a Ten Hag team would be pretty adept to being able to deal with basically strong runners, because you wouldn't necessarily play with a high line. You'd normally have, Casemiro there defending the back four. Here, I mean, every time Cunha got on the ball, it looked like he was just going to... It looked like a playground game where you had a
Nunes
5 years older than everyone else. Yeah, I know. And Sarabia. I mean, they were just so easy in terms of transition, being able to get into kind of dangerous areas. And in Mount, you've got a player who is... His best quality is his ability to press and his work rate off the ball. But, alongside Casemiro, he was basically playing as kind of the two advanced states alongside Bruno, and both their positions were so high that it was basically just Casemiro having to sit in front. And once they got past Casemiro, and until, especially in the first half when Lissandro was playing, it was just incredibly easy to draw him out, and suddenly you're bearing down on goal. So I do think, and I say this in August every year, making sweeping judgments over one game, basically more weight is always placed on the first game of the season than any other game, because it's all we've got to go on. And fans who are, I don't have to tell a couple of Villa fans this, but like fans who are incredibly positive after a summer, or after one game, be like, right, what changes do we have to make? Who do we have to sack? Like, who do we have to sell? Who do we have to buy? And actually, it's just one game of football. And when you consider that last season, Marcus Rashford was by far United's most important attacking player, and he just isn't suited to playing up front, and they've gone and spent a lot of money on a striker in Højlund who isn't ready to play yet, understandably. Like, that switch alone of Rashford moving back out onto the left-hand side and having a genuine striker playing through the middle, even if he isn't very good, is going to improve United measurably. I thought they missed Eriksen's control in midfield, somebody who can just get on the ball and just take a bit of time and a bit of sting out of the game. It was one of the luckiest and most fortunate 3 points you're going to see. No, that isn't the sign of a champion or a good side. It's a sign of a team who need work. But I wouldn't be making any sweeping conclusions at this stage, apart from the fact that Wolves under O'Neill look quite fun.
Yeah. Trouble is with Wolves, same problems as the last 3 seasons.
Yeah,
lovely football at times, but cannot score to save their lives. And I text one of my mates when it was 0-0 and Wolves were all over him, just saying, "Man, you'll just win this 1-0." And exactly what happened. But
was your mate on VAR?
Well, I mean, yeah, that decision, absolutely scandalous. They make all the fuss about all the changes they're trying to make, and then they get that wrong, and then come straight after the game and say, "Yeah, it should be a penalty." Don't say anything. Just don't say anything. It's a penalty. Just don't say anything. Yeah, it makes it worse, I think. So coming straight out and saying, "Yeah, that was a pen. Actually, that was a big mistake." Just don't say anything. Demote the officials the next week. That says it all. But to come out and just say you were wrong, completely wrong, after is absolutely scandalous. I've got the Who Scored Tottenham Manchester United combined 11 here, and they're using the ratings from 2023 alone. I believe this midfield would have the same kind of problem as Manchester United actually had at the weekend. So the Who Scored team reads: Onana in goal, Wan-Bissaka, Romero, Martinez and Luke Shaw as the back 4. A very open midfield 3 of Casemiro, Fernandes and James Maddison. And then a front 3 of Jadon Sancho, Heung-min Son playing off Marcus Rashford. Sam, you've put an 11 together on your debut for us. Does it marry up with that, or is it completely different?
To a point. Onana in goal. I've got Dalot at right back. I prefer him, and Shaw on the left. Yeah, I'm very much team Dalot, if that is even a thing. I don't know if that's a thing in Manchester United circles, but I'm team Dalot if there is such a team. If not, I'll start the team. And then in central defence, I'll take Varane and Christian Romero. I've got the same midfield 3, despite panning it 5 minutes ago. Casemiro, Maddison, Bruno. But this team doesn't have to play a game of football, right?
No, that's true.
It doesn't have to play a game of football. I like Rashford on the left. I'll therefore put Son on the right. And I'm I'm not sticking Højlund in this team until I've seen him play a couple of minutes. So I think we'll go with Richarlison up front.
So you play. Which side of football are you going for? More Postecoglou or more Ten Hag? Or a nice mix.
Theoretical, actually. It's a hypothetical teams. It's hypothetical football, and trust me, it wins 10-0.
Well, everyone does their 11 differently. Jonathan Wilson does his 11 very differently. Usually, he just picks 11 Man City players and says that's the best team. You've got it.
Any game.
Yeah, even if we're not talking about Man City, he picks 11 Man City players. Right then, let's get some score predictions for this one. Tottenham against Manchester United. George?
I think Spurs might win it. I'm going to say 2-1.
2-1. George?
You already asked.
No, George. Sam, even.
I think with Tottenham being so counter-attackable and Man United retaining the ability to be such a strong counter-attacking team, like even if it's not going particularly well for them, the speed that they have, I just wonder if this is actually a 2-2, another 2-2 for Spurs.
George, come out. Oh, no, joking. I will go 1. I'll go 1-1. Tottenham 1, Manchester United 1 on the first home game under Postecoglou. Right then, let's look at Manchester City against Newcastle. And George, nice start for Man City, obviously winning 3-0. There is some differences between them and Arsenal that I might come on to in a bit if we have time. But the big news coming out that game is Kevin De Bruyne being injured for 4 months. It felt to me like they needed to purchase a midfield player anyway. Now, I feel like it's not desperate because it's Manchester City, but they are short of bodies. And for 4 months of no KDB and the window's open, you'd expect them to be active.
Yeah, I mean, we know they're obviously trying to buy Lucas Paquetá. It's the kind of signing that you imagine will just happen at some point between now and the end of the window. It's pretty rare that Manchester City have a public pursuit of a player who doesn't end up becoming a Manchester City player. And, you know, I could see the logic in him coming in. He's somebody who, certainly having watched a lot of him play for West Ham last season, and then I thought he was a bright spark in what was a very poor Brazil team in the World Cup. And that was kind of looked a very different player. And he didn't have a bad first campaign at West Ham, to be fair. But he seemed like a perfect addition to the City squad in terms of when De Bruyne was fit. We know that De Bruyne very rarely plays 90 minutes now. And to bring on Paquetá for the last 20, 25 minutes or so of a game when it was getting a bit stretched, you could see him thriving in that role. Now the role will be a bit different. I mean, the good news for City is that Cole Palmer's emergence is coming at a very good time in terms of De Bruyne's absence. Phil Foden, important to remember that Foden played a bit part role last season, really, and he looks set to be back playing possibly in a more central role. He could even play in the De Bruyne role. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's necessarily numbers and depth that's the issue. I think it's more that they have lost their best player, and I include Erling Haaland in that category. Yeah. They've lost probably the best player in the Premier League over the last decade or so. And fresh off the back of a treble win where they felt pretty bulletproof. I feel like that has gone now. There'll definitely be the rest of there'll be Arsenal and Liverpool looking at that injury news. Also seeing their first performance in the Super Cup last night against Sevilla, where they really struggled to turn possession into anything meaningful. Kind of came away as winners on penalties, with Ederson making some massive saves at 1-0 as well, which could have seen them go 2-0 behind. It's an issue. It's a massive problem. And, as a neutral, it's sad because I think we should enjoy Kevin De Bruyne as long as we've got him. But he looks set to be out for the next few months. It
was very kind of you listing Liverpool as the closest challengers to Manchester City with Arsenal there, George. I've got to say, that was very, very, very kind of you, I thought. Sam, you watched the second half of Villa's midfield being absolutely destroyed by Newcastle's midfield, and over the course of the whole game, I even thought this before the game, actually, that is a very, very nice midfield. It's got a bit of everything: Guimaraes, Tonali, Joe Linton. That is a midfield that's going to cause teams in the Champions League problems, in my opinion. And for this game, if they get the plan right, Newcastle, that could be the case with Manchester City, because that's a hell of a midfield from Newcastle.
It's good, yeah, and it's very intense. It's very, very intense to play against and very difficult to play against because the Eddie Howe style of coaching, it's it produces some wonderful football at times, but it's underpinned by a ridiculous work rate.
Yeah.
And you look at these players, like Bruno is all silk and all skill, but also he works very, very hard for the cause. And like Bruno, like, let's not get it twisted. Like Bruno Guimaraes is an absolutely stunning player. Like he could step into Manchester City's midfield and not look out of place whatsoever. And when Man United and Co and Arsenal all let him go to Newcastle that 1st January, it was a huge mistake because they've allowed this project to kick on. And then Tonali and Joelinton, like their work rate is off the charts. It really is. And so they set this ridiculous tone. And when you go to St James's Park and you don't look particularly ready for the first game and you've just sustained 2 ACL tears, yeah, you're probably going to get run over. Now, Man City is a slightly different kettle of fish. Obviously, the control that they can exert over games, even without Kevin De Bruyne, will make that work rate a little bit less effective against you. But the way Newcastle pounce on spare balls in central midfield and the way that they transition and they counter, like, it's pretty scary at times. And watching City last night, watching like Lucas Ocampos and 2 passes and En-Nesyri kind of carve them open for chances, I was sitting there thinking, well, if that's Harvey Barnes and it's Alexander Isak, well, what happens? What if En-Nesyri had actual feet? Would they have been 3-0 up before City could even mount a comeback? Can the guy only score with his head? And if you put Alex Isak in that exact scenario, would Sevilla have been out of sight? It's genuinely quite possible. Now, caveat it all with the fact that City were at least 4 key players down on Wednesday night, and they'll obviously restore some of those guys to the starting 11 where possible. I mean, we're expecting Ruben Dias back after a concussion protocol, and probably John Stones, and this changes the picture quite a lot, Dan. Like, obviously, these guys are absolutely incredible. But yeah, this is a great early test. And just to round it off, George, you said that they don't look bulletproof anymore. You're right. Just remember that City never looked bulletproof at the start of a season. I always forget this because they always finish the season. Their last 3 months are always so incredible. But rarely do they look anywhere near their usual selves in August or September, or even maybe up to January.
And in fairness, they never really do when they're playing away from home in Europe either. So
no. Yeah, that is true. That was actually a typical Man City
even
away.
Champions League final as well.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're completely right there. Right, we talked about Tonali. I don't know how much you've seen of the game back, George, but where would you put him, do you reckon, in the top 10 Premier League debuts of game week 1? I don't know whether you've actually seen this, or I could be spoiling it here. But
I have.
Yeah, I've seen it. I'm going to ask you that. Sam, have you seen where he is?
No. Is this on Who Scored Ratings?
It's the Who Scored Ratings.
I have not seen this, no.
Right, okay, so we've got the top 10 Premier League debuts from game week 1. Where do you reckon Tonali sits? What number?
Well, yeah. So I'm just trying to imagine his Who Scored rating off what I saw. It must have been a minimum of 8.2. Something like that, or maybe 8.1. So I'm going to go with 3rd.
No, I mean, not close with the rating either.
What?
7.64 he got, which I'm surprised. I'm surprised, and he's 5th for Premier League debuts in game week 1. I mean,
you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you, but that feels like a low rating, doesn't it?
It does.
My one and only appearance on the Who Scored podcast. It's been great.
I've been slicing the algorithm for about 3 years, and I'm still getting asked on. So that's absolutely fine. Unfortunately, I watched so much football at the weekend. The player that's number 1 in the list is the only player in this list I didn't watch their debut over the weekend. I've only seen the highlights on Match of the Day. So number 1 is Jefferson Lerma for Crystal Palace with a rating of 8.12 on his debut, which I can't really comment on. I can comment on all the 9 others beneath him, but I can't comment.
I think the tone of your voice, Dan, commented for you there.
Maybe, yeah. Obviously, I've only seen Match of the Day, and I don't remember even seeing him mentioned in Match of the Day or seeing him with my eyes in that game at all. But yeah, he's number 1. James Maddison, number 2 with 7.84. Harvey Barnes, who only played about 20 minutes max, he's 3rd with 7.79. Andre Onana, 4th, 7.74. He had a very good game in goal. And Tonali,
until the bit where he
incident, it would have gone down. I imagine had that decision gone through the way it should have done. Tonali's 5th with 7.64. We've got João Pedro in 6th, Disasi in 7th, Moussa Diaby 8th, Declan Rice 9, and Mateo Kovacic in 10. Next game I'm going to play with you is guess the combined 11. Again, George, have you seen this? Because that ruins it if you've seen it.
I kind of looked at it. Well, they shouldn't be sending me all this stuff then.
That's true. Don't send.
I'm doing my research. I'm looking at the graphics.
Yeah, don't send it. Who scored? I don't want this stuff going to the guys. Before
I can't remember it really. So
okay, so Sam, you obviously haven't seen it because you've done no research leading into leading into this podcast. It seems. Just looking at the spread here. So Newcastle, Manchester City combined 11 using ratings from 2023 only. What do you think the spread is?
9-2 to City's favour.
No, it's 6-5 in Newcastle's favour.
What?
Yeah, that's what Who Scored have come up with. I suppose Newcastle did have the best defence in the Premier League.
Yeah,
but in 2023, it felt like Man City didn't concede any goals to me.
No, yeah. I mean, I had guessed there that Nick Pope was in for Ederson, and
not with a high rating though, 6.6.
Goalkeepers, isn't it? And then that Bruno would be in as well. I think maybe what I've done there is I've sort of put it into reality a little bit and thought, well, who could possibly crack the team? And I can see a scenario where some people would prefer Nick Pope, and I can certainly see a scenario where Bruno goes into the team, and I can see a scenario where Isak belongs at Manchester City too because he's that good.
Yep.
But yeah, wow, that's an incredible split.
So we've got Nick Pope in goal, back four of Trippier, John Stones, Fabian Schär and Nathan Ake. Rodri, Ankers, Guimaraes and Joe Linton. And then the front three is Isak on the right, Grealish on the left, and of course Erling Haaland, who's never really out of any kind of statistics that we do up top. George, do you think that's a fair 11, let's say? I don't know why I'm asking that, he's probably not, but yeah, fair 11.
No, not really. But at the same time, I do think Newcastle maybe deserve more respect.
Yeah.
This was kind of my thinking throughout the game on Saturday, was like Newcastle from October onwards had the best non-penalty expected goal ratio in the whole of the Premier League. Like last season just wasn't a fluke. Like they were very much one of the best teams in the country. They've added quality since then. they're I think they're 20-1 to win the Champions League this year. Like, and myself included, most of us were like, oh yeah, they had a great season last season. They're probably going to fall out of the four. Like when you look through the team, that team you listed there, like Trippier was revolutionary in terms of like the whole trajectory of Newcastle United Football Club. His arrival signifies something massive, and he was superb last season. The same can be said of Bruno Guimaraes. And then Joel Linton's positioning into a central midfield role was an absolute stroke of genius from Eddie Howe. Like I can kind of see it, but maybe if you're starting everyone from expectations rather than level pegging. So there we go. I'm going to say yes, it's correct.
Can they get a result at the weekend, George? What's your score prediction?
Yeah, I think they possibly can. Again, you don't want to be too reactive to a 5-1 victory, especially given, I do think the Tyrone Mings injury certainly threw Villa a little bit on Saturday. But at the same time, it was kind of a reminder that they are so good. And when you look at the options off the bench, when you saw Harvey Barnes come on and score the goal, set up Callum Wilson, also set Callum Wilson up to miss a very easy chance too. I think Isak is one of the quality strikers in the league, and I'll still maintain that I don't think anyone's quite woken up to quite how good he is yet. So yeah, I'm going to say a 1-1 draw.
Sam?
Find it very difficult to back anybody other than City when a game takes place at City. But I'm going to continue the streak of an incredible amount of goals on my debut appearance. I'm going to go 3-2 to Manchester City.
I'm going to keep it a bit more conservative than that. I believe that Manchester City will win 2-1, but Newcastle will give them a huge scare. Next one, West Ham v Chelsea. I'm actually really intrigued by this game. I think this game might be one of the games of the weekend, actually, and probably be one of the more interesting games of the weekend. Well, sometimes when West Ham play, it can be quite dull, but I do think this one will just be a fascinating, interesting game. Alvarez and James Ward-Prowse seem to be the duo that have been brought in to replace Declan Rice. Now, usually when teams buy multiple players to replace one player, it doesn't really work. But in this instance, it did feel like Manchester City. It did feel like West Ham needed to bring in a duo to replace Declan Rice because he's that much of a loss. Yes. Yeah. I mean, they've got in two players who, certainly in Edson Alvarez, they've got a player in who I think is a real coup in terms of, to be able to go out to Ajax and pluck a player who has been such an impressive performer for them, who is, certainly statistically, his numbers are unbelievably strong across the kind of defensive and pressing metrics. So I do think that strikes me as a good signing in terms of replacing Rice. I think James Ward-Prowse is someone whose set piece delivery alone is just a massive positive, especially when you think of how important these set piece goals can be, and you think that West Ham last season having struggled, I think adding that to your armoury where you're going to get
expert delivery from corners and set pieces, and also probably score a few as well, is massive. So, and he's a good player in an open play. Although I would definitely say that him and Declan Rice are different stratospheres when it comes to kind of talent. And I think that it's easy to say, well, these two players come in and replace them. I think with Rice, when you lose a player who has been so important, it kind of goes beyond just their pure ability. Where I think his the aura that he brings to the club, the fact that he was their elite player for so long, it would be unfair to expect Alvarez to come in and fill those boots immediately. So I think they're a couple of quite sharp signings, but I wouldn't say that they're going to improve off the back of the two of them.
Alvarez strikes me as someone who's quite suited to the Premier League from what I've seen of him, and it will be interesting to see James Ward-Prowse play for someone else, just by virtue of he's been at Southampton for so long. And obviously they were trying to sign Harry Maguire as well. You could almost picture the set piece link up of James Ward-Prowse and Harry Maguire. And in fairness, West Ham have still got some big boys. I'm sure there'll be people he can find from set pieces still, because his delivery is exceptional. But Sam, should they be looking at a striker perhaps instead of another centre-back? They've already got 4 decent centre-backs, West Ham. The Maguire saga has been played out in public. It doesn't look like he's going to join now. Yet Michail Antonio still leads the line for West Ham in the year 2023. Should they be prioritising a striker rather than a defender?
I would say yes. Zuma and Naya Figueira are very good. They have Thilo Kehrer, and they have obviously Edson Alvarez used to play centre-back. So you have a player
Ogbonna as well still there, I think.
And Ogbonna's still there as well. Yeah. So you've got 4, maybe 5. Okay, they've got European football, but you don't want to get too greedy, do you? You don't want to. It's David Moyes, but you don't want to stack your squad to the point where you've got 5, maybe 6 centre backs and only 1 striker capable of playing your way. Because Antonio really is the only one that's stuck, because he's the only one that's willing to play the genuinely joyless role of the David Moyes striker. And Scamacca, fed up of it after a year. Sebastian Haller, not interested. And Danny Ings doesn't really suit them. Just doesn't really suit them.
That's the strangest signing I've ever seen, Danny. That is January. We're in the relegation battle, panic stations at its best, because he just doesn't fit at all.
100%. Yeah, he doesn't. I mean, if you play up front for David Moyes, I mean, Antonio has said it himself, which helps us talk about it a bit more, because it's difficult to talk about it in terms that other than derogatory, because generally they just need to run the channels 40, 50 times a game, chase balls, try and get into the corner, and then try and turn on it and recycle the ball back through. And it's not a particularly fun role to play. It's not particularly enterprising. And when you speak of it in those terms, it doesn't sound particularly positive. But when Antonio comes out and says, this is what we do up front, then fine, I'm all good for it. And obviously Danny Ings is not physically, he's not capable of doing this, right? And also he always played as a bit of a second striker anyway. And if West Ham do think that they can get through this entire campaign with Antonio, who is now injury prone naturally, and Ings, who's also very injury prone, I just don't see where they're coming from. And keeping it on the Southampton theme, Che Adams will run the channels all day long for you. And so there is a player that you can go to Southampton if you want, and maybe for 15 or 18 million, whatever, you can probably find a player who won't wow you, but will actually do what David Moyes needs you to do. And then from that point, obviously, Jared Bowen comes alive, Pablo Fornals comes alive, and the others start to sing, and the goals come from elsewhere. But yeah, in totality, I agree with you, Dan. You don't need a 5th centre-back. You need another striker.
Chelsea, I think, are only going to end up signing the 3 players this week, George, so a quiet week at Stamford Bridge. You're well placed to talk about this player, given his EFL history. So Michael Elise, injured at the moment, but it looks like Chelsea are going to activate his £35 million release clause, which is an absolute bargain in this day and age, and bring him to Stamford Bridge. He spent time at the Chelsea Academy. I believe he spent a little bit of time at Manchester City and Arsenal's academies as well. Went away, went to the EFL, did very, very well at Reading. Had that first season at Palace where it was about consolidating and getting to know the Premier League, but looked good when he played. Then last season became a regular, playing every week, productivity, goals, assists, lively player, part of the France under-21 setup. Chelsea getting a good player.
They're getting a fantastic player. Someone who, as soon as he started playing for Reading, it was very clear to see how, there are a few kind of talents that come through the EFL, and some of them, they're going to be Premier League players going forward, the likes of kind of Ollie Watkins, Jared Bowen. Some of them, are going to be elite talents, like right up at the top level. Grealish was obviously one, even though he'd already made a bit of a splash before he came down. Jude Bellingham, obviously another. Asea Berrieze is one who hasn't quite got that move yet, but Elise was one where his ability on the ball, his ball striking ability, like I know it's a weird thing to say, but just basically the way he kicks the ball with his left foot is just an absolute joy to behold. He's got every single facet and aspect that you need to be a really effective inside forward off the right hand side, and also playing as a 10. And I do wonder if he could be playing as a 10 here, a bit for Chelsea at least to start with Chukwuemeka obviously starting at the moment, who's another magnificent talent, but probably a little bit further along his progression than they'd have imagined. I think for £35 million, especially in this market, I was surprised at the time that Elise was, didn't hold out for maybe a different move when he left Reading. But I guess it makes a little bit more sense now, knowing he had that £35 million release clause that someone could pick him up.
Yeah, what do you make of Chelsea week one, Sam? Because I wasn't sure what to expect of them or Liverpool. Actually, I think they were the two hardest teams to judge before they kicked a ball in the Premier League this season. I liked their shape. I liked the system they lined up with. They managed to get through the game without what's going to be their future midfield, and I thought they looked good. And also, they've just got the right manager for this kind of thing, haven't they?
Yeah, I was impressed. I was keeping a little track of Chelsea in pre-season where I could, and so some of the things that I saw in pre-season were present in week one, which is always a positive. And I think chief among those was the close combinations between the players, and how well the players actually combined and interlinked, and some of the slick passes and play that they produced. Little 1-2-3 give and goes and Enzo bursting from midfield, like it's really good, and it's what they'd been working on. And Levi Colwill playing left centre back, finally getting his shot, which is great. His connection with Ben Chilwell, trying to release Chilwell over the top. There was loads of little things there that we saw in that first performance that project very, very positively. We saw them working on that in pre-season, and we saw it in action in the first week. So even though they had to throw Conor Gallagher on the bonfire a little bit and say, like, can you just try and be Moises Caicedo for 1 week and just do your best, because we're not willing to compromise our plan for Enzo just because he's not here yet. And to be fair to Gallagher, he did grow into the game quite nicely. Good. He did get, but in the first 20 minutes, he was like, what am I supposed to be doing again? Can we get a timeout? Like, he did struggle with it initially, but that's not going to be his problem from now, because that's going to be Moises Caicedo. Like, I was impressed. It was never all going to come together. The first fixture against Liverpool is really, really tough. First game under a new manager, but like 70% of what I saw is really, really promising. And I've seen some top four hype. I've seen some title challenge hype for Chelsea over the course of the summer, where people are starting to get a bit excited. And this is the kind of performance that really affirms all of that chat. And one of my Chelsea supporting friends said, that's the best game of football we've played in 18 months. I mean,
you're right.
And he's absolutely right, because they've been dreadful for 17. So great.
I was really impressed with her. That was the most interesting game of the weekend. Chelsea v Liverpool. Surprised me a little bit that they lined up three at the back, but actually completely makes sense with the team that they're going to have. That's going to make them tough to break down, but it's also going to make them more dangerous going forward, I think. Looks like Lavia is going to join Caicedo, George. Not convinced that he's going to get into the team straight away, but WhoScored have been looking at midfield trios and where Enzo, Lavia and Caicedo would rank in terms of Premier League midfield trios. They may play that in certain games, in fairness, and play without a number 10. But, what do you make of that trio? As
you say, I don't think it's going to be a trio very often, I wouldn't have thought. But in terms of having three options, I think it covers basically every base. All three of them have brilliant ball-playing ability, whilst also having the defensive side of the game kind of nailed down. I think with Caicedo, I think the role that he's going to play for Chelsea will fit him far, far better than that Fabinho role he'd have been employed in, which would have clipped his wings a little bit too much for my liking. And in Enzo, I think we have a player who there's basically no reason why he can't be the number one midfielder in world football, I think, for the next decade, basically, given his talents. And in Lavia, I think there's a little bit more of an unknown in Lavia in terms of
he's so good, though.
He's amazing.
He's absolutely superb. I was introduced to him at the City Academy the day before his debut against Wickham, and I genuinely thought he was 14 years old. And then the person who introduced me was like, he's making his debut tomorrow. And then 6 months later, he was moving to Southampton. Like, it was absolutely nuts. But it's just in terms of where he is in his progression. He's a bit younger than the other two. And I think, as you say, he may not come into the first team immediately, but it feels like the absolute perfect place for his development going forward, where he will be, he can be employed next to either Caicedo or next to Enzo going, in this season at least, despite their youth, certainly with Caicedo and Fernandes, how much experience they've got, with Caicedo playing a full season last season in midfield for Brighton, going to the World Cup, and then Enzo, where there's no issue at all in terms of what he's already achieved.
George, Caicedo's got 35 caps for Ecuador or something. It's absolutely absurd. Like, he's 21. How has he managed to do this?
I know. It's nuts.
An absolute baller.
Yeah, that's how.
So it's really exciting. I mean, I would still say when you look at City's midfield, and basically you just look at Rodri and whoever they can put alongside him, and especially last season when it was Gundogan and De Bruyne, like, there's a fair way to go until you can say this is the best three. But in terms of the potential and the ceiling, it's really exciting.
Well, WhoScored have put a graphic together of best midfield trios. I'm going to caveat it by saying we know that not all these midfield trios will play together, because not all teams use that system before everyone on Twitter gets antsy, because we know everyone on Twitter does get antsy. It's actually 10th in the top midfield trios based on average ratings from 2023. Again, Fernandes, Lavia and Caicedo with 6.77. The best, as you'd expect, is De Bruyne, Rodri and Bernardo Silva with 7.07, followed by Rice, Ødegaard and Partey on the same rating, as well as Tonali, Guimaraes and Joe Linton on the same rating. Just looking down, if teams were to play this way, there is some interesting trios there. We've got Gross, Enciso and Dahoud, Bentancur, Maddison, Bissouma, Doucouré, Eze and best player from last week, Jefferson Lerma, Luis Kamara and McGinn, which is my personal favourite, and then Alvarez, Paquetá, Ward-Prowse, and then finally Fernandes, Casemiro, Mount. I said finally, there's one more, Szoboszlai, Jones and McAllister. Pick a midfield trio, both of you, from the Premier League, from those ones I've just read out. Exclude Manchester City from that, because I know you both going to pick that. What midfield trio would you pick?
The Newcastle midfield is awesome, and the new age Arsenal midfield. If you stick Ødegaard in with Rice and then put Havertz in there, like that's potentially absolutely exceptional as well. So so from the last list, we're sort of subbing Havertz in for Thomas Partey, which was also extremely good, by the way. But adding Rice into Ødegaard is like, I mean, that's seriously good stuff, right? So that would be where I'm looking. I think in my current midfield threes, like, I'd still put Rodri plus whoever top of anything, because the guy's ridiculous. And Kovacic is obviously no slouch, and John Stones is basically a midfielder. I think I'd have the Rice, Havertz, Ødegaard midfield second right now. Bruno G and Tonali and Joe Linton. It's difficult to put Enzo and Caicedo +1 above them before they've played a game of football. Yeah. So I'm going to go with Newcastle there in third, but I'm convinced that this is going to be excellent. And George, maybe not, I wouldn't say that Enzo has the tools to be the best midfielder in the world, but I would say that he's clearly going to be one of the best midfielders in the Premier League very soon. He's probably already third best or second best or something. He's absolutely absurd. Caicedo is amazing. We'll see. Are they not kind of the same thing? If you are one of the best midfielders in the Premier League, normally that will probably translate to one of the best centre midfielders in the world.
I thought you were saying Caicedo and Fernandes were the same. I wasn't.
No. All I'm saying is, if Enzo's got the potential to be the best midfielder in the Premier League, then it's hard to kind of draw a ceiling at world football. That's true. Although, Barcelona and Real Madrid have got some pretty good midfielders. So, the old Pedri, Bellingham dynamic. I know. It just brings in a few more. But you're painting along the same lines, I guess, on that one. But I think that's been my top 3 or 4. And Bentancur, Bissouma, and Maddison. Bentancur is not fit, so I'm going to have to put them aside for one. Also, surely we want to see a little bit more from Bissouma than one game. He was better where we say he's back, because he might be back, but he's not quite back. No, George, you pick one. Elek ball. Sam's. I like the way. You said pick one, and I picked 5. Sorry, George. Yeah, so I'll choose a one where it's just a fun one to watch how they're gonna progress. And I'm sure we've always spoken about Lerma being the best debutant, so we'll put him to one side and say in Doucouré and Eze, you've got 2 players who I think will be destined for some pretty special things in the future. 2 magnificent players who, I don't think they'll be at Palace long after this season. So. And if Lerma is there to kind of provide the platform from which they can thrive, then that's outside of the main midfields, maybe one that I like the look of. Yeah, for Bardell ball, it would have to be that Newcastle midfield. I think that it's just got a bit of everything, as I said earlier. I think that's a lovely combination. What do we make of Roy Hodgson squaring up to Max Lowe on the weekend?
Liked it. Like huge fan of it. The anger on his face, the pure hate on his face. Go on, Roy.
This is why he refuses to retire. He can't pick a fight anywhere else, can he?
And then Lowe, I love how Lowe looked at him and just kind of chuckled. He was like, "I'm not getting involved in this."
He's 75. Don't do anything, Max.
Yeah.
There was a film that Michael Caine did about being a pensioner and basically going on a killing rampage. It reminded me a little bit of that.
In the underpass. I remember this.
I forget what that film was called, but it very much had that kind of vibe. Roy Hodgson's face.
Could be a lawsuit coming away here, Dan.
What's that film called?
Is it Harry Brown?
Harry Brown, that was it. Roy Hodgson, angry. he was exactly the same as that film. It seriously had those vibes. Let's get some score predictions for West Ham Chelsea then. George?
2-0 Chelsea.
2-0 Chelsea. I'm going to go 1-1 again. Sam?
I'll take 2-1 to Chelsea.
Friday night, we've got Forest v Sheffield United. Score predictions, please. George, you go first every time.
Okay, I think Forest win this 1-0.
2-0 to Forest.
Okay, I will go 2-1 to Nottingham Forest. Then we move on to Saturday, Fulham v Brentford.
0-1.
1-1.
I'm going to go 3-1 to Brentford. Liverpool v Bournemouth.
2-1 Liverpool.
2-1 to Liverpool. Not 9-0.
3-1 to Liverpool.
3-1. I'm going to go 4-1 to Liverpool. Wolves v Brighton.
I think this could be an incredible game to watch if Wolves managed to put in any kind of display and transition as they did against United. 1-3.
2-0 to Brighton.
2-1 to Brighton from me. Villa v Everton.
Oh, I'm going to get in trouble here.
You are going to get in trouble. 1-1. I won't be happy with that, Sam.
1-0 to Villa.
And I'm going to go 2-1 to Villa like last season. And then finally, Crystal Palace against Arsenal.
Arsenal drop points, 1-1.
Ooh.
I cut my heart. Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that, but I'm just going to be a bit safer. I'm going to go 2-1 to Arsenal, but I wouldn't be surprised if George is right there.
I'm going to go 1-0 to the Arsenal. So quite a few differentials there. Hopefully we'll do a league table this season. Asking who scored to keep track of that just didn't happen last season, but hopefully someone will be bothered to do it this season, and we'll get a little league table going. Obviously we missed the first week. We didn't do any predictions, but we read the comments and someone in the comments asked to bring it back. So here we are bringing it back. Chaps, it's been an absolute pleasure conversing with you both this morning. Thank you very much for joining me. Thanks to Sam for making a good debut as well. And George, your debut was good last week as well, but already an old head.
This is the ever difficult second album, isn't it?
I've had a good time. I've had a cracking time, and that's the main thing. If I've had a good time, that's what it's all about. Never mind the audience. But yeah, thanks to those that have watched. If you are enjoying it, then subscribe, get your post notifications on, comment, like, all that jazz. Tell all your friends and family about the show, because we want to try and grow the podcast this season. We'll be back, of course, next week to preview game week 3. So yeah, please enjoy all the football at the weekend. I know I will.